My name is Brian Jack. I'm a special agent with IRS Criminal Investigation. A lot of people don't even know that IRS has a criminal unit. We have a small police force. IRS has like 100,000 employees, approximately. Police force, the criminal unit, CI is what we're called, have like 2,500 agents nationwide. All right. So a little bit about myself. I graduated from Georgia Southern University 2011 with an accounting degree. Shortly after that, I got a job at Heritage Bank of the South. I'm actually from Albany, but I went to Georgia Southern and I work out of Savannah. So that's where my office is. There's going to be probably another guy coming in. He's my coworker out of the Macon field, or the Macon office. Together we belong to the Atlanta field office. Atlanta field offices encompasses state of Georgia, state of Alabama, state of Mississippi, state of Louisiana. It's a big field office. Most field offices with IRS CI are not that big. Ours is though. So he may be coming in. He's setting up shop over there to meet the firms right now. That's his task today. So anyways, a little bit about myself. Georgia Southern, got an accounting degree, finished in 2011. Went and worked at Heritage Bank of the South. From 2011 to 2014, I was a financial accountant there, making journal entries. Very robotic. I didn't necessarily like the job because it was extremely mundane, and it was kind of the same thing day in and day out. So 2014 rolls around. I get a job in Washington, D.C. with the government, an obscure intelligence agency nobody's ever heard of called DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency. It's like the sister to the CIA, but nobody's ever heard of DIA. I worked there for 6 years in D.C. First 4 years I was an auditor. Not an auditor like you guys are probably accustomed to in your auditing class or the accounting curriculum. Much more geared towards like national security, intelligence gathering, that type of stuff. 2020 rolls around, and I get the job with IRS CI as a special agent. I started on March 1st, 2020. Everybody knows what happened 3 weeks later. The entire world shuts down. So I was at FLETC. I'll tell you what FLETC is here in a little while. FLETC is the training academy. I'll give you guys a synopsis of it, of kind of what it entails. I was at FLETC for 3 weeks, and they shut us down. They sent us home for like 3 months. I got a nice early taste of retirement. But they brought us back, and here I am. So that's me. I'm a pretty boring guy. What is IRS-CI? All right, the reason I chose this picture, I'm going to kill the screen because you can't really see it. I'm going to kill the lights because you can't see it well, real quick. Like I said, I belong to the Atlanta field office. There's multiple field offices throughout the country that are Treasury, IRS. This is the Philadelphia field office. I don't know anybody there. I don't think I do at least. The reason I chose this picture, I wanted to show you guys, part of my speech here is to recruit some of you guys, all right, if you're interested. That picture was taken this past September, so about a month ago, month and a half ago, something like that. Philadelphia field office was at a pre-op meeting, and IRS CI, along with other federal agencies like the Bureau, HSI, Border Patrol, state, and locals all assisted in searching for Daniel Cavalcante. Did you guys ever hear that story? Dude that escaped prison last month, convicted murderer. It made national headlines. So he's a Brazilian national. He whacked somebody in Brazil. He fled Brazil, came to the States illegally, killed his girlfriend in the States in 2020, and he was convicted and sentenced, I assume, to life. He was convicted this year. He escaped after the sentencing hearing. And he was on the run, living in the woods for two weeks. IRS assisted with that. The reason I show this picture, just to let you guys know, we're not a bunch of nerds sitting behind a computer, crunching numbers in Excel and looking at spreadsheets all day. So we do fun stuff like this too. What do we investigate? What's the most popular tax crime? Anybody? We've all heard it. Al Capone, tax evasion, right? Any and all tax crimes, that's our forte. We're financial detectives. Not only do we investigate tax crimes, we investigate any financial crime, okay? So obviously tax evasion is the most popular. Everybody's heard of it. Another popular one is failure to file a tax return if you're required to do so. It's a misdemeanor if you do not. We're not in the business of charging misdemeanors, so there's a good chance we're not even going to go after you if that's the case. We look at high-dollar tax evasion cases, all right? Money laundering, that's the clip I was telling you about. If you're interested in watching it, it's Breaking Bad. It's where Saul tells Jesse, basically explains like what money laundering is. It's a 4-minute clip on YouTube. It's pretty cool if you've never seen it. My favorite one is Ozark, season 1, episode 4. Marty Bird gives like a narrative of what money laundering is. It's about a 1.5 minute long clip. It's also on YouTube. That one takes place at a strip club, so couldn't show it here. Money laundering, in its most basic sense, is taking dirty money and sticking it into the financial system, depositing it into a bank, buying a nice bracelet at a jewelry store, something like that, right? So, what's your name?
Ricky.
Ricky?
Yes.
Okay. Ricky's a drug dealer, okay? Ricky sells drugs, very lucrative business. She makes about $200,000 a year. Dirty money over here, $200,000 in dirty money, right? If she just starts depositing that money into the bank, it's going to throw up a lot of red flags at the bank. They're going to file reports on Ricky. They're going to go into this database that law enforcement looks at, and we're going to be talking to Ricky very quickly, right? Big red flag right there, because the bank's going to know that she doesn't have a job, she's unemployed, she doesn't seem to own a business, there's not a lot of information out there. Although they're seeing large cash deposits coming in, they're going to be filing reports. That's if Ricky is a dumb criminal. If she's a smart criminal, a smart drug dealer, she's going to create a clean business too. Car wash, strip club, anything that's pretty cash intensive, right? So at that point, she's got the drug sales over here, and then a clean business over here. Blend the money together, stick it in the bank, nobody will ever ask any questions. That's what money laundering is. There's a couple other statutes far beyond the scope of this class that I'm not going to get into, but that's money laundering pretty much in its most basic sense. Also investigate terrorist financing. We all know what happened in Israel 2 weeks ago, I guess. It's illegal for a U.S. person to send money to an organization designated as a terrorist organization by the U.S. State Department. All right? So Hamas is one, Hezbollah, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, all of those. You can't send money over there. You can't send money to Jordan and know that it's going to be walked across the border to Syria and handed to some terrorist. It's illegal, punishable by a healthy jail sentence. I would assume probably like a minimum of 10 or 20 years. I've never had a terrorist financing case, because terrorism isn't that heavy in Savannah, but you know, we're always on the lookout there. BSA reporting violations. BSA, Bank Secrecy Act, kind of came about as a result of 9/11. Patriot Act required banks to kind of enhance their anti-money laundering laws, enhance their terrorist financing laws. And so BSA, I think it already existed, but it was kind of rebranded around the 9/11 time period, back in 01 or 02, something like that. We investigate like failure to file. So I'll give you an example. A SAR, Suspicious Activity Report, is kind of like the golden goose of BSA reports. It's really helpful for us because you get a really smart banker who sees a lot of suspicious transactions. He or she sees Ricky's cash coming in and Ricky's structuring. She knows that banks are required to file a CTR for cash transactions over $10,000. So she's going to structure, keep those deposits under $10,000. Some really smart banker is going to see that, recognize a pattern there. They're going to write a narrative. They're going to explain all the cash transactions. They're going to total it all up. They're going to identify her by name, by social security number, goes into this database that we can see. That's pretty much, that's my favorite report. I'll talk about a case that I actually developed based on SAR later on. The CTR, which I talked about, $10,000 requirement. Banks and financial institutions are required to file CTRs for any cash deposits or cash withdrawals over $10,000. The sister to the CTR, Form 8300, that's for non-banks and non-financial institutions. Somebody who wants to come and buy a car over $10,000, pay in cash, really nice bracelet. The jeweler is required to file 8300. The car dealership is required to file 8300. And it has the same thing, person's social security number, their name, and here's what they bought, right? Any failures to file, we will investigate those. Everybody knows what identity theft is. I'm done picking on Ricky. What's your name?
Lawrence.
Lawrence?
Lawrence, L-A-R-S.
Oh, Lawrence. Okay. Lawrence has bad credit, all right? But he wants to buy a Hellcat, right? So he needs a loan, and he takes, what's your name? Michael. Lawrence takes Michael's social security number. Somehow he got it off the internet, got a picture of Michael's driver's license. He gets a loan. He does it all on his phone, so the bankers don't really know that the photos don't match up. Gets a loan, and just doesn't pay it back. He buys a Hellcat, doesn't pay the loan back, so identity theft right there. Everybody knows what that is, so I'm not gonna harp on that too much. Basically we're financial detectives. My point here is there's two reasons people commit crimes, right? The first one is what I call a crime of passion. Husband and wife get divorced, wife finds out the husband's been cheating, pisses her off, she decides to have him whacked. Crime of passion. That's the far less popular option as to why people commit crimes. The more popular option, people want to make money, all right? Drug dealers don't just put drugs on the street because they like seeing people get high. They probably do because it brings that person back just to make the drug dealer more money. But it makes them money, and that's why we're here. What are the qualifications to be an agent? This is across the board. If you want to be an FBI agent, same thing applies. If you want to be a DEA agent, these first two apply, okay? Got to be a U.S. citizen. Do we have any dual citizens in here? Anybody, any foreign students? No?
Yes.
We do?
We do, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
So you got to be a U.S. citizen. If you have a dual citizenship, they will make you renounce whatever the other citizenship is. It's just a trust thing, right? So you got to stand up on a mountain and say, I denounce whatever citizenship you have. That's what I used to think renouncing your citizenship was. I think it's just you fill out paperwork. 37 years old is the maximum. That's the oldest you can be to get the job, all right? I'm approaching that. They're not going to kick me out when I turn 37. You got to be 37 to get the job. Reason being, somebody somewhere said, it's impossible for a 57-year-old or older to do this job. There's a 20-year vesting retirement period. So 20 from 57 is 37. That's the oldest you can be to get this job. We used to have an accounting or finance requirement, but that's been waived recently because we're on this hiring frenzy right now. There's basically two types of people that we like to hire. First one is accounting students like all of yourselves who go into public accounting or banking or something like that. Teach the accountant how to be a cop. Now, alternatively, and this is pretty new, you teach a cop who has a criminal justice degree, who's been on the streets for 5 or 10 years, teach them how to be an accountant. You blend the two together, and then you have a financial detective, which is what we do, okay? Very rare that you find somebody who actually has both disciplines from the get-go before they're hired on. And so if that person is ever found, there's a good chance they're gonna get the job, but we generally hire one or the other. All right, so let's just say everybody here decides to apply for the job tonight. When we're at Meet the Firms, I'm gonna have these postcards, and on the back of the postcard, scan the QR code, it'll take you directly to the application page. Everybody decides to apply tonight. There's gonna be a long period of radio silence, like probably 2 months, and then you're gonna get notified that you meet the qualifications and they wanna interview you. Probably going to be an interview in Atlanta. If you guys apply to be in one of those 4 states that I mentioned, that interview will happen in Atlanta. The interview, you gotta pay for the gas to get there yourself, and if you wanna stay in a hotel or something, you gotta fork that over. That's out of your own pocket. Everything after that point, the IRS pays for it, all right? So, panel interview, you're gonna be interviewed by 3 people simultaneously. They just hit you with questions. Upper management, it's not people like me, not agents. They are agents, they're just supervisory agents, okay? 2 of those 3 people got to give you a thumbs up in order to pass the interview and then proceed with the next phase, which pretty much the rest of it all happens in tandem with one another. So there's a drug test, you just go pee in a cup. Background investigation, so it's a lengthy kind of paperwork you got to do. It takes like a couple hours. It's about 100 pages. They look at where you've lived, prior drug usage, drinking in excess, have you ever committed a serious crime, any trouble at work, everything like that. They're going to go talk to your past neighbors, your past landlords, past professors, anybody who supervised you at work, maybe a coworker, something like that. Ultimately, you clear that, you get a clearance level of public trust, high risk. Reason being, government's entrusting you with a gun. They're entrusting you with sensitive information, social security number. They got to believe that you're not going to use that to commit identity theft. Public trust, high risk. That's what you get starting off. A lot of people in my office, myself included, we have top secret clearance. If you need to look at classified information, they'll elevate that. There's a whole other background investigation that goes into it. but you likely will in your career get elevated to top secret. Tax audit, you won't even know it's happening unless the revenue agent, aka auditor, has like a follow-up question for you, something like that. A lot of people think special agents are revenue agents. Revenue agents are on the civil side. They can't arrest anybody. The only thing they can do is hit you with a tax bill. We're on the criminal side. A lot of people get that confused. So a revenue agent is kind of a name for an auditor. It's the same thing. All right, medical exam. I've always had 20/20 vision, so I'm not real good with like the numbers, but I got this off of some paper in my office. You can have uncorrected vision of 2200. I don't know how bad that is. They also allow LASIK to be considered uncorrected. So with corrected vision, you got to have 20/20 in one eye, 20/30 in the other eye. An automatic disqualifier is color blindness. If you're not colorblind, it's the easiest test you'll ever take because you just follow your finger down a colored line with a different colored backdrop. They say it runs in the male population, but it is an automatic disqualifier. Don't ask why, I've never understood that. That's another one that's across the board. FBI, Secret Service, DEA, that'll wash you immediately for whatever reason. Hearing loss can't exceed 30 decibels, so it's an audiogram test. You go into like a phone booth, it's a little bit bigger than this right here. You go and you sit down, you put headphones on. It's kind of like a soundproof booth. And you hear ringing in each ear, like a little beep. And it starts high and it gets low, and every time you hear it, you hit a button. And then qualify with a gun every 3 months. They teach you how to do that at the police academy. All right, FLETC. I told you guys I was going to talk about FLETC. Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. There's about 5 or 6 throughout the country. The main one is in Brunswick. Glencoe is kind of a made-up town, but it's in Brunswick, Glenn County. That's why they call it that. FLETC, you're in there with every other federal agency, every other federal agent trained to become an agent with 3 exceptions. Postal Inspection Service, they train somewhere in Maryland. FBI and DEA train in Quantico, Virginia. Everybody else goes to FLETC. FLETC is a 6-month program, 2 installments of 3 months. First installment, CITP, you're in there with other agents from other agencies. We were in there with mostly NCIS students. You could be in there with Secret Service agents, HSI students. The exception of those 3, they could be in your class. Once you graduate that first 3-month training program, you go to the next 3-month program. It's called SATE. It's IRS specific. You're in there with only other IRS students. The instructors are all IRS agents, current agents, retired agents, or lawyers. And they teach you more along the lines of kind of the first half is they teach you how to be a cop. Second half, they teach you how to be a cop with the financial discipline. Those are just the authorities that they give to us. So anything you would expect, everybody's seen the movies, everybody knows what an FBI agent can and can't do, for the most part. They carry a gun on an airplane, arrest people, execute search and seizure warrants, all that type of stuff. We also do that. We work jointly with every other agency as well. Anybody got any questions so far before we learn how to commit tax evasion? Any questions about me? I'm a boring guy. Any question about the job? Anybody? Question? Panel interview. It's an hour long. They give you an hour, and they just hit you with questions. It's a structured test, so to speak. I mean, it's you're sitting there, and then there's 3 people hitting you. I can't remember how many questions it is. I ballparked it at like 15. I don't even remember the questions. I wouldn't be able to tell you if I did. But they limit it to an hour. Okay? So it's in your best interest to do your homework beforehand and have like examples of stuff that happened in your life, or work examples, or school examples, or any type of example to use that to answer the question, right? So if you think about it, an interview is kind of like public speaking. So you just got to kind of prep before. I ran through this probably 5 times before I got here and I'm doing this today. So it's kind of the same thing. But it's not any different than like an interview in a public accounting firm. Anybody got anything else? All right. How do we develop our cases? A lot of people ask me, like, how do you know somebody's doing something wrong, right? Well, I'll give you 5 kind of examples, but really the possibilities are endless as to how we develop our cases. The reason I have a picture of Biltmore Estate, and a lot of people laugh when I tell them this, I've never developed a case by doing this, but we can just drive around. Savannah's got a lot of rich neighborhoods. It's an extremely rich community. Drive around, look for a couple big houses. You ever do Zillow, pull it up on your phone, and as you're driving in real time, you can see how much each house costs? So go pick a $4 million house, write down the address. Maybe there's a Rolls Royce and a Corvette in the driveway, write down those plate numbers. Go back to the office, figure out who owns the house, figure out who owns the car, okay? So I'm gonna pick on you. Steven. Okay, we got Steven here, right? Driving down the road, I see the $4 million house. I go back to my office, and the cars and the house all come back to Steven. Steven is being the owner, all right? What am I gonna do next? I'm gonna pull Steven's tax return, because I know that he's living a very lavish lifestyle. He's in a $4 million house. I would expect to see very large reported income on a very routine basis. 2017, 2018, 2019, all the way up until now, right? If I see him reporting $1 million a year, that's not a red flag, that's expected. If I see Steven reporting about 30,000 in income, that's gonna be a huge red flag. I'm gonna do a little more digging. Now there are possibilities, maybe Steven hit the lottery a couple years back, paid all his taxes, he did the cash payout option, and he paid all his taxes 5 years ago, right? He's just got all this leftover cash, and that's how he bought the mansion, okay? Perfectly fine. That rarely happens. It's much more likely that Steven's just cheating on his taxes. All right, so that's one way that we develop a case. Another way we develop a case is from auditors, revenue agents. They can randomly select somebody for an audit, or maybe have a couple red flags, and that's how they selected somebody for an audit. They realized that Steven he put a pool in his house and bought a new car, and he put both of those expenses on his personal return, right? They're not business expenses. They don't belong on a Schedule C. They ended up on his personal return through the flow of the Schedule C. The auditor is going to see that. He's going to kick it over to criminal and say, hey, here's what I found right now. And by the way, Steven's also commingling business and personal expenses all in the same bank account. That's another red flag. So we're going to take a look at it and see whether or not there's actual intent there. Right? Do we think it would make for a good criminal case? If we say yes, we're going to take it and run with it. If we say no, we're going to kick it back to the auditor and say, go forth and do great things with this. We agree with you that that was not a business expense, but we just don't think it makes a good criminal case. All right. Case in point, I actually had a case, my very first case out of FLETC. I graduate FLETC, the next day I show up in the office and I have a stack of papers this high. They say, congratulations, Agent Dak, here's your first case. I say, thanks. So it takes me a couple weeks to digest the stack of papers that's this high. And a lady in Savannah owned a business, a restaurant and a bar. She's in jail now, she got 18 months. She wasn't turning over her, so she owned this business, she wasn't paying over employment taxes. So if you get a W-2, or not even a W-2, anybody got a job here that is like a W-2 employee? All right, so you look at your pay stub every 2 weeks, you get paid, let's just say you get paid every 2 weeks. You look at your pay stub and you almost pass out because you see how many taxes are withheld. The owner of that company who's actually withholding those taxes is required to pay that money over to the IRS on a periodic basis. I think it's quarterly, I'm not sure. So the revenue officer in this case was out to collect the money to the tune of $428,000 over 5 years that this lady was spending on herself and not paying the IRS. He identified those red flags I was telling you about, and he kicked it over to us. And I made the decision, okay, this sounds like a good case. I'm going to take it and run with it. And she's currently in jail. So that's a case example of us working with civil to develop a case. So we also work with other law enforcement. And this is probably the most popular option. We just get a call from another local, state, or federal agent, and they say, hey, we got this information. We pulled somebody over at 3 a.m. He had $100,000 in cash and an odd amount of Social Security cards in his car. So we may go do that interview at 3 a.m. They're probably not going to call us at 3 a.m., but they can get called out to go interview that guy while he's in jail for, at the time, maybe suspected DUI. I got a coworker, his name's Jason, he's in the Savannah office with me. DEA was looking for wiretap. suspected drug dealers, and there was drug talk. They were dropping drug talk. They were also dropping ERC credit talk. That's this new COVID tax credit that came out recently. People are manipulating numbers, falsifying Schedule Cs, fabricating numbers on what would be a legitimate Schedule C. And they were talking about this. So DEA calls Jason, says, hey, Jason, you want to be a part of this? He says, tell me a little more. And they tell him that, and he says, yeah, sure. So that case is now being prosecuted. It's about to be indicted. SARS. I told you I was going to give you a case example of a SAR. I got a case right now, suspicious activity report. I got a case right now where my partner works in another agency in Atlanta, SBA OIG. Those are the COVID loans that went out in 2020, 2021, and some of 2022. He comes to my office and says, hey, I want to see this SAR database. I don't have access to it. So I said, okay, let's develop a case then. So we pull all the SARs nationwide between 2020 and 2022. I don't remember how much it was. It was maybe like 5 million SARs. Well, that's way too much to eyeball for two of us. So we started sifting through, and the first thing we did was we geographically isolated the SARs, right? That's one of the options. You can filter out everything. In our case, that was not the Southern District of Georgia. Southern District of Georgia is Savannah, basically from Dublin all the way east, all the way up to Augusta, all the way down to Florida. That's considered Southern District of Georgia. Right here, we're in the Middle District of Georgia. If Jonathan comes in, he's out of Macon. He investigates everything in Americus because it's Middle District of Georgia, right? All right, so we filtered out anything not Southern District of Georgia. And then I did a keyword search for COVID-19, coronavirus, filtered out everything that didn't hit those keywords. And then I'm left with, instead of 5 million SARs, I'm left with maybe like 500 SARs. All right, so filter by dollar figure, and the top, we ultimately picked like the case, as our case, number 8 on that list. So it's the 8th highest dollar figure that met the criteria. The top 7 were companies that I had heard of before that clearly had a massive payroll and had larger revenues. Number 8 was a company I had never heard of before. And I can't tell you what it is because it's an active case, but they clearly did not meet the payroll requirements to get the amount of PPP loans they got, and the same with the EIDL loan, Economic Injury Disaster Loan, the sister to the PPP. That was revenue-based. So that's how we selected that case. And then another option to develop a case, I call it the vengeful ex-spouse. Husband and wife get divorced because the husband's cheating on the wife, she's pissed off again, and she comes in. You can walk into a police office and give a tip, say, hey, I think I have information on a crime. Same thing with the IRS office. She walks in and says, hey, my husband's cheating his taxes, here's his name, here's the name of his business, here's his social security number, here's how he's doing it. We say, okay, great, Susan, thank you for the information. You may hear from us tomorrow, you may never hear from us again. So that's just another way that we develop cases. Okay. How do we commit tax evasion? All right. If we're looking at this balance beam right here, which way would you expect it to go? Which way would you expect revenue to go if you want to commit tax evasion? Revenue would go up. Who says up? Okay. Why?
Because you're trying to get more money into your pocket, personal money, if you do commit a tax crime.
Who says no? Why? That's right. You don't want to report all the revenue. So it's going to look a little something like this. Okay? A lot of times when we see tax sheets, we see revenue go down and we see expenses go up. So if you think about it, right? A legitimate business wants to make money, all right? And a legitimate business also wants to pay their fair share of taxes. So you've got you've got revenues up here and you've got expenses down here. Everything in the middle is income, net income, right? It's in a tax sheet's best interest to do one of two or both things. So everything in the middle is net income, and that's what the person's taxed on. It's in their tax sheet's best interest to reduce revenues so that the net income, instead of being up here, it's just this gap, right? So they're only taxed on this. Alternatively, you can do the same thing with expenses. Still reduce that net income, all right? Does that make sense? The only Generally, we pick one side or the other. We don't mix the two. Reason being, what's your name? Gianna? Gianna's got a very lucrative construction company, makes $1 million a year. 2017, 2018, 2019, made $1 million a year. She told her accountant all of her revenues, and it was properly reported on the tax return. All right? 2020 rolls around. She's sick of paying her taxes. She doesn't think the government deserves all the money that it's getting. Neither do I. All right? So she blames lost revenue on COVID, when in reality, she still made $1 million in revenue in 2020. So, got this $1 million in revenue, right? 2020 rolls around, she only tells her accountant about $500,000 in revenue. The other $500,000 went into another account. She didn't mention that account to her accountant when they're doing her taxes. We're not looking at, from an investigative standpoint, we're not looking at the $500,000 that was reported. We're looking at the $500,000 that was not reported. So she's got this business, she puts roofs on houses, and she redoes flooring, and she'll redo kitchen cabinets, stuff like that. And all of her customers are old people who still write checks. So it's easy for us to investigate because we see all the checks going into this other account. That's what we're interested in, right? We gotta go and interview, if not all, most of the people who wrote those checks. Check, top left corner is the person who issued the check, and then they signed the bottom right. We got to go and interview all those people to make sure that those checks were actually for revenue purposes and it wasn't like a loan or something non-taxable like that. Makes for a lengthy investigation. On the other hand, we have to do the same thing for expenses to make sure that expenses are not personal in nature, that they are definitely or pretty clearly business expenses. So we try not to blend the two. Could make for a really, really long investigation. They give us time limits on how long we're supposed to take on these. And so generally, we pick one or we pick the other. We don't blend the two together. Public enemy number one, Al Capone. Anybody not heard of Al Capone? Everybody's heard of Al Capone. Al Capone's the one that put IRS CI on the map. And that's because he was a bootlegger back in the 20s and 30s, I think. He was a bootlegger, mobster, moonshiner, probably killed a lot of people or at least had people whacked. But ATF at the time, I think they were called Bureau of Alcohol, they knew he was up to no good. They knew he was rich, but they couldn't pin any bootlegging on him, okay? So they call IRS and they say, hey, IRS, at the time we were the Treasury Intelligence Unit or something along those lines. So they say, hey, IRS, this guy's rich and we know what he's doing, but we can't pin anything on him. Maybe you guys can get him for tax evasion. And whoever the agent was that convicted him did a great job. Not going to get into how he or she did it because I don't even know who the person was. I know how it was done, far beyond the scope of this class. Ultimately, he was convicted of tax evasion, all right? Tax evasion has 3 elements. 3 elements have to be met in order to have committed tax evasion. For simplicity purposes, and I'll talk about those 3 elements and give you what each element means. But just for simplicity, talk about bank robbery. FBI investigates bank robbery. I know it's financially related. We don't investigate that. I don't know what the elements of bank robbery actually are, but I can probably come pretty close. All right, so let's just say it's, you gotta be in a bank, element number 1. Element number 2, you gotta get money from the bank. Element number 3, you have to use intimidation or duress to get that money. And again, I don't know if that's the actual elements, but I think it's probably pretty close. All right, anybody that walks into a bank, or at least 50% of the people that are coming to withdraw money, they meet 2 of those 3 elements right there. So the key element is number 3. You walk into the bank, get money, and say, give me all your money, I've got a gun. Walk in with a shotgun, or maybe like a bomb strapped to your chest. Or you say, give me all your money, I'm gonna blow up the building if you don't. Obviously, that's clear intimidation, right? So in order to commit any crime, you have to, that has to be the case. Element number 1 for tax evasion, evasive affirmative act, okay? What does that mean? I don't even know the legal definition. I'm sure there is one, but I'll give you kind of an example. It has to be an act that's clearly egregious and clearly leaning towards, the only reason it could have been done was for somebody to commit tax evasion, okay? So, nominee account. Anybody know what a nominee account means? What that means? It means like a fictitious account. So Michael, right? Michael. Michael's got this construction company. I'm going to use that as an example again. Makes $1 million a year. Going back 17, 18, 19, same thing, right? 2020 rolls around, and he doesn't want to report the entire million. He only wants to report half of that, $500,000. He creates a nominee account. You got any siblings? Okay. Let's just say one of them's his twin, right? I actually do have a twin, and so I know his social security number. First 5 of the 9 digits are the same, last 4 are not. So he creates a nominee account in his twin's name, all right? Because he knows the social. At one point, his twin went to the bathroom, and he took a picture of his license. So he creates an account in his twin's name, all right? He's also a co-signer on that account, along with his twin. We'll call him Stephen. You're Stephen. Stephen and Michael. All right? $500,000 in those checks he starts putting $500,000 of checks into this other account. He only tells his accountant about the initial $500,000, the account that the accountant already knows about. All right? So affirmative evasive act number 1 is Michael creating this separate account and sticking money in it. And affirmative evasive act number 2, which is much more damning, is that he didn't tell his accountant about that other account, which led to the accountant not reporting that $500,000 as revenue. So 2 affirmative evasive acts there. Element number 2 is a tax due and owing. You got to have some sort of tax debt that's unpaid. That's easy. Element number 3, and this one is across the board with any tax crime, called willfulness. And willfulness is 2-pronged, right? Intent is part of it. Does anybody know what the other part of willfulness is? Knowledge. So if you're driving down the street, I-75 on the interstate, and the speed limit is 70 miles an hour, pretty much on any interstate, at least in the state of Georgia. State trooper clocks you at 85. He blue lights you, pulls you over, gets to talking to you and says, you know how fast you were going? You say, yeah, 85. I thought that was the speed limit. He's going to say, no, it was 70. You're going to say, no, I thought it's 85. He's going to tell you, ignorance is not a defense of the law, meaning just because you didn't know, you should have saw the road sign, or should have pulled up Google or Waze to see what the speed limit was. In the tax crime world, knowledge, you got to prove knowledge too. So you can actually use ignorance as a defense. Reason being, the tax code's just a convoluted and complex mess. So we have to kind of show that this person was a CPA or had an accounting degree. And if they didn't know, then they should have known. I'll give you another example of the lady that's now in jail for the employment tax situation. In that stack of papers was an email from her accountant to her. Okay, it was PDF'd, nice. I scanned it in, and it became pretty much my most damning piece of evidence because it showed clear knowledge. The accountant sent her an email and said, hey, you want to get these paid as soon as possible because DOJ is actively prosecuting people just like yourself. She received that. I could see the sender was the accountant and the recipient was the bad lady. So she clearly had knowledge. She had also been told several times from the revenue officer that she owed this tax debt and she just wasn't paying. She didn't get on a payment plan, nothing like that. She clearly had knowledge. So you got to overcome the knowledge hurdle and the intent hurdle. Intent ties in with affirmative evasive acts. Together, it's willfulness. All right, submission of a false return. I'm going to gloss over this one. Really, the only difference with this one is you don't have to have that tax due and owing. Okay? Everything else is pretty much the same. You got to sign the return. It's got to be under, it's called a jurat. It's like a little paragraph. I swear and affirm that everything is true and accurate to the best of my knowledge. Have to have signed that, and then you got to have willfulness, and the return itself has to be false in some material way. Aiding and assisting, we can also go after the tax preparer, but it's the sister to the one that I just talked about with the false return. Okay, why does all this matter? It matters because the national debt's ever growing. I took this screenshot like 2 weeks ago, so I'll bet you that 33 trillion is probably now at least 34 trillion, maybe even 35 trillion. If you look at the clock, it's just spinning, right? So the government makes money in 2 ways. First one's kind of a Ponzi scheme. It's treasury bills. And that's a large portion of how the government funds defense, funds homeland security, makes you wait in long lines for TSA. That's how they pay TSA, right? And then the other one is obviously through revenue, all of our revenues, all right? So the tax debt is ever growing, and if federal tax revenue is here, well, there's a lot of tax cheats, and it actually should be here. So if everybody's reporting everything, we're probably still gonna have a national deficit, but it won't be as much. So that's one reason why it kind of matters. So that's the end of the slides. And I just want to give you guys another sales pitch. We don't really have time. I'll have time for a couple questions, I guess. We're going to be at meeting firms, and I say we because there's another agent that's with me. He's out of Macon. Be happy to answer any questions you guys have now or over there if you guys are going to go. But if you're interested in being a federal agent, don't limit yourself to IRS. Apply to IRS if you want to. Pick your top 5. Pick FBI, Secret Service, DEA, because every single one of those agencies loves to hire accountants. Because again, people commit crimes to make money. And the best people to chase those people are people with accounting degrees, people that know taxes, people that know how to follow a bank statement, stuff like that. So pick your top 5 if you're interested, shotgun your application out, take the first final offer that comes through. It's an extremely hard job to get because a lot of people want to do this. So the supply is down here, the demand for the job is up here. So you have to beat out a lot of other people who are also very qualified. So again, take the first final offer that comes through. You can always jump ship. If you don't like IRS, you can always jump ship and go to DEA. Because once you're in the federal agent world, they like to poach from other agencies. We do too, all right? So if you don't want to apply, great. No hard feelings. I wish everybody the best of luck in their future career endeavors. And again, we'll be at Meet the Firms at 11 o'clock. Happy to answer any questions there. If you want to apply, I'll stick some postcards right here. Just go in the back, scan the QR code, and it'll take you directly to the application page. All right. Thanks for your time. I appreciate it. I know, kind of a boring subject, you know. I was at Georgia Southern 2 weeks ago, and I taught interviews and interrogations class. My wife heard that one, and then she heard this one, and I had to wake her up twice for this one. It's just kind of the nature of the beast, you know. So I appreciate everybody's time. If you got any questions, feel free to ask them. I'll hang around until the last person leaves, and I'll see everybody over there. So thanks, guys.
Thank you.